Welcome back to the Astrology Interview. And today I have with me Nicola Crawford. Now, Nicola is a herbalist and astrologer and works in the Rhondda Valley. So, Nicola, I'm so interested. I heard your talk with the Somerset Dowsers.
That's right.
And I was fascinated by what you were saying. And we've had a little chat before we before this video started, about how one of the easiest ways to understand your makeup is to look at the elements, the earth, fire, air, and water elements. And I wanted to talk to you about that and the work that you do as an astrologer. So how do you want to kick off with this? Because it's a big subject.
It is a vast subject. And actually, I was thinking about this before the talk. It's like, how do you dilute this down into 45 minutes? Well, really. But as astrologers, we do this innately anyway. We understand the elemental forces. And sometimes I think it gets a little bit lost in astrology, bizarrely. We look at a chart and all the complexities of a chart. I mean, I don't know how you work, but before I meet with a client, I always look at their chart to get a sense of who they are and how they approach things. And that approach is often an elemental approach. Have they got a predominant element? Are they mainly what we would call melancholic, for example? So are they earthy?
Yeah.
Because then that they're going to approach not only their life, but the way that they receive information and process information in a different way. So just from a basic standpoint, that makes a huge difference to the way that I will talk to my clients. And if I'm talking astroherbalism in terms of from a medicinal standpoint, it makes a huge difference to the way that they will receive information about health. So that's another area altogether.
You just going to give some details. So let's just talk about each element as we go down. So let's start with fire and your experience of working with people who've got a lot of fire or no fire when it comes to health and well-being.
Okay, so in the old Galenic model, of course, it's, somebody who's got a choleric temperament. So temperaments, constitutions, elements across all of the different, whether you're talking Anami Tib or whether you're talking Ayurveda, it's all the same thing, essentially. It all distills down to the same thing. And it's a way of typifying people, but not in the way that Western medicine maybe does that. Because as we know as astrologers, that people are so uniquely different. And so we can talk about the fire signs, the earth signs, the water signs, but within that, there are so many nuances. And so if I'm talking to somebody who is strongly fire, and we all have different ways of working that out when we look at somebody's chart, it's not just sun sign. It can be, it's a whole mix of things and a whole mix of planetary placements and the ascendant sign and et cetera, and sometimes what time of year they're born as well is interesting. But if somebody is fire, then that they like speed. That they like information. They just want the top note. They just want the information. They process really fast. And people generally, and I am talking in generalisms, people generally who are fire signs, they don't like being led. They're very autonomous. So they don't take advice very well. And this is from an astrological standpoint, because I do purely astro readings and I do purely herbal consultations, and I merge the two as well. So I've got different aspects to what I do. But generally, people who are fiery, they like to take control of the pace of a reading, but then, they may argue a point with you, or they, or, they may put, They may input into something, but they like something that's fast-paced and quick, and they want the answers. And in terms of health, if we're talking people who are choleric, they don't tend to. I don't see many of them in my practice. They tend to get very kind of acute illness, unless there's something very out of balance. They tend to get
Because
very acute,
fire, isn't it? So they
come
burn
and go.
themselves out, don't they? They can
Yes,
get
they do.
completely exhausted, or
Yes.
but they're always off doing running or doing or
Yeah,
out there.
exactly. So it tends to be, I mean, there's ways of assessing our dominant constitution, but sometimes more often than not, we're a mix. And
Yeah,
that's where the layers of complexity come in. And it's all about bringing people, whether we're talking astrologically or herbally, it's about mediating and bringing people back into balance. So you're right, fiery people burn themselves out very
yeah.
quickly. They charge at life, don't they? We talk
Do.
about them as being the risk takers, the ones that stick their hand in the flame when they're told not to. And you, and so whatever you tell them to do or advise them to do, they probably won't do it. They'll take elements of what you say to them and then weave it into their own way
But,
forward, and that's okay as well.
yeah. Well, when you're talking about that, it just struck me, if you have a fire dominant child,
Mm,
you don't know that they're fire dominant, but they're having this extreme behavior, can have extreme behavior as a fire child. It's
yes,
really useful to know what you've got, what child you've got there, and that can also help how it fits into the child fits into the family or into the siblings, or why it behaves the way it does. The child, I shouldn't call it it. So it's very useful information knowing what the dominant element is.
yes, absolutely, because we tend to live in a society now, unfortunately, that tends to over medicate if we're talking
Yes.
children. And there's so many children who are diagnosed with all sorts of things, and placed on all sorts of drugs like Ritalin to, moderate their behaviour. And maybe they don't need that. Maybe they just need a gentler approach.
Mm.
I'm not saying that's always the case, but it
Yeah,
can be the case. And
yeah.
so I think the problem, and this is where the elemental balance and interweaving comes in, is where you've got maybe a family of people who may be a bit more, say, because you tend to get family types, don't you? Do you
You
find that?
do?
But watery, and then bam, you get this detonator of a child that arrives that's fire and very excitable and very full on and wants, and then the family is a little bit more passive and a little bit more nurturing and a bit more laid back and not as maybe aggressive, and they don't know how to handle that child. I mean,
And
it's
even
something I've thought about doing is kind of, working with parents on that. I
yeah, I think
interesting
it's
area.
work. I mean, the other thing is having parents who've got very fixed charts and a child that comes in, which is, let's say, very mutable, a mutable
Exactly.
chart. So for people that the mutabilities are Sagittarius, Virgo. Uh,
Gemini.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But when you've got a very mutable child and you've got fixed parents, that's really tough on the child, because the parents are overly safety conscious,
That's
don't want
right.
to change, want
Yeah.
to keep their status quo, and the
Mm,
mutable child is going, I need to go off and explore the world. Really
exactly.
challenging dynamic that is.
Yes, yes. I mean, they should teach this stuff in schools. We say that it's such
They should.
a hackneyed thing to say now, but it's so it would save us a lot of problems, wouldn't it? And
Yeah,
it's not just, I mean, childhood obviously is the important thing because it's where we're formed, isn't it? And it's where a lot of our personality is developed and a lot of the wounding takes place. But we live in a very sanguine society. We live in an age, don't we, of information and communication and increasingly rapid communication everyone's expected to be sociable. And so it's not just children, it's like a lot of adults are struggling now
Yes.
because of the fast pace. You know, when we look at things like AI coming in, I mean, it's also a very fire society. I think those qualities are quite admired. You know, people who are athletic and people who are doers and people who are leaders and take charge. So that air fire tends to predominate Western culture. And I think there's a lot of the maybe the water and the earth signs who are a little bit more passive,
Yes.
need a lot more space, need time to process things, sometimes need time to be left alone, don't
That's
really
very
get
earth, isn't it? That sense of I need to know where I'm safe.
exactly,
Earth signs want to be safe
exactly.
for them to be able to function.
Yes, because they take a long time to process things.
Yes.
And
Yes. It's
we
interesting.
don't value that in our modern society. We want quick answers, you
Yeah.
know, especially with things like Chat GPT. It's like, you know, you type something in and blah, 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 blah. You know,
Mm.
it's just, and it's getting faster, isn't it? It's like the Amazon society. Everybody wants something and they want it delivered now. And
Yeah.
there's no time to just sit and think and reflect and ponder, and we're losing something. And I think that people who are strongly melancholic, people who are strongly phlegmatic, you know, watery and earthy, they are they are being you know, ridden over roughshod, I think, in our society. They are being you know, put in a corner and not really getting a lot of the opportunities. But of course, that has a knock-on effect. And in your previous profession and obviously now, you would have seen a lot of that. That actually that then manifests as mental
Yeah.
health problems and
Of
problems
course.
feeling like I don't fit in, that I don't
Yeah.
have the qualities of sociability. I haven't got the friends that I need to. I don't have the business contacts that I should be forming.
I think it's really interesting. I've thought a lot about how society is so rapid now, and it doesn't draw breath. It's off you know,
Yes.
and this expectation to be a performer, to be top of your
Mhm.
to be doing all this social media, and I suddenly thought, you know, when I was a child, this is only 72 years ago. When I was a child, I remember my mum used to go and rest in the afternoon, and she expected us
Mhm.
to do the same. And I
Mm.
remember we were expected to read a book, that we weren't expected to play at a, but you know, maybe it was for half an hour after. It was always after lunch, always. And that's where she went to put her feet up. And there was this sense that you paced the day
Yes.
in a
Yeah.
much slower, more respectful way. And we've lost that without reflection, without the ability to reflect. We don't know how to listen to ourselves. We don't know
Mhm.
how to listen to what's going on in the body, but all we do is feel pain, but we
Yes.
don't know how to process it. Does that make
Yes.
sense to you?
No, absolutely. And you know, I think that is very symptomatic of you know, you've perfectly described society there. And what happens then is we end up seeing people who don't naturally fit the model and end up burning themselves out, because we're a mix of all the elements, aren't we?
Yes.
And there are times for striving and seasons where we should be pushing ourselves ahead, and times when we should be in repose, and times when we should, you know, be more active and reflective, and all of these qualities all intermingling. And yet we seem to be on, you know, foot on the gas all the time now. There just doesn't seem to be any time to just stop. And you know, a lot of people who come to see me who end up coming through my doors, that's all they need really, is just being told actually it's okay to take half an hour nap in the afternoon, have a little siesta, and
Yeah.
just, you know, refuel yourself in that way. It's
Yeah.
fine to just go off for a nice country walk by yourself. You don't have to think about everybody else first. It's like, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Otherwise, you're going to like drain the battery down.
I think, Nicola, I wonder if you agree with this, that we've lost the connection with the rhythms of the moon. So I'm really conscious of um and especially, when we're younger women, when we're menstruating,
Mm,
and,
mhm,
and there's been a lot of work now being done with the cycle of the menarche, thank goodness. But
mhm.
we have a natural cycle within ourselves of the waxing phase, which is the let's go for it phase, and then
Yes.
you have the culmination, which is the opposition
Mhm,
to the moon and the sun, and that's a culmination point where I'm done with that. And
mhm.
then you have the waning phase, which you start processing what you've been doing, but it isn't a doing phase, it's more of a integration phase.
Yes.
Then it comes back to the new moon, and then another
Mhm,
cycle starts. Now, they
mhm.
can be very quick cycles, or they can be years.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
people don't understand the cycles of our lives.
No,
That
exactly,
there is
exactly.
constant there's a constant movement and cycle of waxing and waning phase of how our life is playing out.
It even comes down to things, doesn't it, like gardening.
Yeah.
I think gardeners are more in tune. People who spend a lot of time in nature are more in tune with those cycles. But then, us in our arrogance, we try to dominate there as well by forcing things at the wrong time and doing things that are, within the wrong cycles and all the rest of it. So, but I think there is a move back to acknowledging the power and the strength of the moon and working with her, if you believe the
Yeah.
moon is a her,
Yeah.
rather than against her. But yes, absolutely. We can't be on it all the time, and nor should we be, because that's when whatever our dominant element is goes out of balance. And so then we talk in astrology, don't we, about remediation. And so it doesn't have to be, herbal remediation.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of our time telling people or suggesting to people, okay, well, why don't you go and do this? Why don't you introduce this? Why don't you, so we kind of do that naturally to try and get people back into that balanced state again, whatever the balanced state is. Um,
Mm.
just reminded me as well, talking about kind of like moon cycles and this time, but other planetary cycles. Sometimes, and also medicating people. Sometimes it's okay to be sad. Sometimes it's okay to be reflective. Sometimes it's okay to need your own space. A lot of people who are strongly melancholic, they need their own space. They need to, that's not a depressive state. It's melancholy is not depression. It's just this deep kind of brooding. And we need time to do that. And we do that at different phases of the moon.
And there's different phases of our life.
Yes.
Well, don't we? So
Yes.
I just want to just make sure that we're covering all. So we've talked about the earth element, which
Mm.
is more melancholic and needing safety, and not great with change unless they decide to make the change, and the time that they need to make these decisions is
Mhm.
longer than a fire person will be off and running, but a
Yes.
third person will
Yes.
be, I need to make a plan. I need
Mhm.
to talk
Mhm.
about it. I need to think about it. Oh, I might do it next year. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So let's go to the water element. How do you describe somebody who's very watery?
Okay, so somebody who is, I mean, there's a medical way of describing that, and there's an astrological way of describing that. But generally, if we're talking about somebody who is water, so phlegmatic, we're
What
talking
do you mean
about
by
somebody who.
phlegmatic?
Mhm.
What do you mean by phlegmatic?
Phlegmatic is somebody who temperamentally is cold and wet, temperamentally, constitutionally. And that can mean a lot of things. These are the sensitives. These are the people who are in touch with their feelings. These are the people who are the natural nurturers. A lot of my clients work in the healing professions, and they tend to have a very strong water phlegmatic signature in their chart. They're the ones who always put others in front of themselves, rather than look after themselves quite often. But the other side of that is water is very drifty and not very direct. And that can be a good thing because it causes a lot of the artistic temperaments fall under the phlegmatic, the water signs. Um, but it can also be people who are very impressionable and tend to take the impressions of others too much. And if we're looking at relationship astrology, they're often, or they can be, dominated in relationships, and take on too much of and not just personal relationships, just too many impressions of people around them. Quite often, if people are having problems at work and they're highly water, then they're taking on other people's problems and they can't distinguish them
Mm.
from their own. And it becomes a massive problem because water holds memory. You were talking, I think, in one of your interviews, I saw you talking about Vida Austin, and
Yeah, yeah,
this imprint of memory, and we are like 65%
yeah.
water. And so when there is something negative that happens, people who are strongly water, they tend to hold on to it more. And that can, arise in illness such as weight gain, or water retention, or just fluid retention in the body, not being able to release things, high degrees of toxicity within the body. And so there's a real challenge, I think, as astrologers, and however you remediate those issues,
Mm.
get those people to be able to release and know that it's okay to release certain emotions and not feel guilt about it. Guilt is a very watery emotion,
Well, it's interesting.
so
It for me, they're more attuned. I think that's the right word. Not sure, to the victim sacrifice uh,
yes.
vibe.
Mm,
And I do all this for you, and you do nothing for me. And then this victim, persecutor, rescuer triangle. And I think
yes,
water signs are more susceptible to that than other signs.
yes,
But I think
yes,
the earth signs can do it pretty well, but the water signs, particularly, I think, are quite attuned to that.
yes. I mean,
Mm.
the problem comes, I think, sometimes, on all different levels, where people have two dominant signs. And so I'm just thinking about the conflict of elements as well. If you get
Mm.
something, I see a lot of people, and I'm the same as well. I'm fire water, and so when you get to see people who have, these different sides to them, and they don't know how to balance that out, that can be very difficult.
I think that's
Um,
a really interesting point, and I want to ask you about this. Let's say, for instance, you have let's say, ascendant in Sagittarius. Okay,
mhm, mhm,
beautiful Sagittarian ascendant. You've got a sun in Scorpio fixed water, and your moon is in let's say Aries
mhm, mhm.
cardinal.
Yes.
So how do you work with people who've got these very different elemental with the great, the important three, the ascendant, the moon, and the sun? How do you
Mhm.
work with that?
Um, I mean, there's a whole complexity around assessing people's constitutions, so there's a little bit more than that. But
Sure.
but yes, I mean, as a snapshot, the big three,
Yeah.
the triad is very, very important. I mean, we all, I mean, I certainly do. I'll look at that first when I look at anybody's chart, even even now.
Yeah.
It's very important because let me just wheel it back. If somebody's
Yeah.
got one dominant constitutional type, one dominant temperament, then it's very easy for them to go into excess with that. So say somebody's very fiery and they keep doing, like you mentioned earlier, they keep doing fiery things. They're very active all the time, running up mountains, doing triathlons, eating spicy food, drinking, living la vida loca, all of that.
Yeah.
They burn themselves out, you know, so they go through these peaks and troughs, peaks and troughs. That is easier to remediate than somebody who's maybe got, you know, two different dominant
Yes.
features. And so what I would do is you speak to both of them, but in different areas of life. So say that somebody has got you know, they are a Sagittarius rising, so they've got that approach to life, and they want, you know, they're very exploratory, and they need to feed that in some way, but they also need to balance out, say, that Scorpio sign. You know, they need to balance out the Aries moon. You said the Aries
Yeah.
moon, didn't you? Yeah,
Just this is just an example.
you
Yeah.
need to honor all of those to keep them in balance, instead of just saying, oh, I am predominantly fire and I've got a lot of water. It's like honor both. So maybe if I see somebody who's got a lot of, you know, they're Sagittarius rising, but then they've got a lot of placements in water, what do you do creatively? What do you do artistically? You know, or even sometimes it can be as simple as, do you ever go swimming? Do you ever walk by water? Do you ever, you know, how, you know, do you do most of your best thinking when you're in the shower in the morning? You know,
Yes.
it's kind
Yes.
of like it's bringing in
Yeah.
those different, you know, aspects of themselves, and this is why it's so important. The work we do is so important, because people need to, you know, they feel conflicted and they don't know why until they come and talk to someone like you.
Absolutely, because I've had clients that are so confused by themselves, because one thing they're like this, and no, but actually, but I'm like this, but I
Yes,
don't know
yes.
which is me.
Yes, who am I?
Who
I'm
am I?
I'm supposed to be I mean, you know, it comes down to that thing, doesn't it? It's like I'm an Aries, but I'm not. My Aries sun is in the 12th house. Very, you know, so it's kind of like my sun is hidden. You know,
Right.
I am not the athletic triathlon type running up mountains. Far, far, far from it. You know, so then it's like, well, I know that I'm an Aries because I'm quite like vociferous and quite, you know, but it doesn't balance out. It's only when you get into astrology that you
Yeah.
can see that
Yeah.
you're a myriad of all of these things. But the problem comes from when you have a dominant you know, sign, a dominant force,
Yeah.
or when you're lacking
Lacking.
a
I have a
certain
lot of
element.
clients that lack. That's really tough for them, because in my experience, I don't know if this works for you, they actually seek somebody outside themselves to fill
To
that
fill it.
element.
Yes. I was saying this the other day when I was talking to somebody about relationship astrology, and it's very rare, I don't know whether you find this, that you get two people of the same sign who marry or get into a long, intimate relationship.
Yeah. I met somebody the other day and they were two Scorpios, and I don't know their charts, but they were fabulous together. Very unusual, because
But
normally it's
it
the
doesn't
opposite.
often happen, does it?
No,
So
no.
we intuitively understand these
Yeah.
things, and you're right, we look for the missing part. I mean, my partner is very earth, very kind of, you know, very solid, very, you know, very melancholic, you know, goes out, you know, goes to work. I just can't hold down a 9 to 5. It doesn't work. I can't do the routine thing. It doesn't work
Yeah.
for me. Never has. It always goes disastrously wrong.
Yes.
And so, yes, we do look, and we look for that in our friends group, and you know, we should look for
Absolutely.
it in our work environments. The
Mm.
problem is when somebody is missing an element, yes, you can, because, you know, the problem with that, just talking about maybe
Yeah.
intimate partners, is sometimes you can over depend on that if you haven't got it at all. And that's when relationships go out of balance,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's almost like that vampiric. You need
Yes.
that energy, and you start like just valuing them for that side of them rather than honoring them as a whole. But
Yes.
that's a whole other.
Because they fill the hole, they do what you
Yes.
can't do or don't want to do,
Yes.
or not called to
But
do.
yes,
And
yes.
so it's
Taking the bins out.
convenient. We haven't talked about air. So can you just say
Sanguine.
something about the air signs?
So the air signs are, I mean, when you think about air, air is hot and it's moist, temperamentally, and it's very movable. It's very, it rules all of the things that move in the body. It's a little bit hard to kind of define and distinguish, but it's a very restless sign. A lot of air signs are very restless. They're exploratory. They like to learn things. They're a very sociable sign. They're often, interestingly, the group that stays most robust until they get to about middle age, and then they tend to start getting illnesses. It's like, they think they're going to go on forever, and then something hits them, around 45 to 55. It's quite interesting. But they tend to do things to excess. I mean, when you think about Geminis, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
we don't need to describe the Gemini personality, but it's also because it's the mind, because air is the
yeah,
mind and the thinking.
yes,
Um, these are the signs that if they go out of balance, these are the
yeah,
ones that are awake at night, staring at the ceiling at 3 o'clock in the morning, turning things over in their minds. These are the people who get anxiety. These are the people who tend to, if they get a health issue, they tend to really focus on it, and to the point where it dominates everything. And so it can be quite extreme, especially, I mean, there's different nuances with the different air signs. Geminis are very like that. They're very,
they want to collect information, so they will do all the research they
yes,
possibly can
yes,
do.
they're the Google doctors, the
They're the
Geminis.
Google.
We're all Google doctors now, but Geminis,
Yeah,
have to research
yes,
everything to the nth degree.
yeah,
Um, and yes, I mean, so as astrologers, we would approach, these people in a different way. If we know somebody wants the detail and the depth, we go there with them.
yes,
We
yeah,
don't give them something superficial. And I know that I mean, I teach, and I know that you do as well. So, and it's, so you have to take account of. I don't run very huge groups because
mm.
I know that different people
Oh, absolutely.
learn in such. I mean, we talk about that, don't we? That there's
Mm,
kinesthetic learners and there's auditory learn, blah blah blah.
really,
It's far far more than that. Different signs learn in different ways. Different temperaments learn in
yeah,
different ways. And so, you've got to honor that, and you've got to give them the information, and then let them go off and do a little bit more research and then come to their own conclusions.
mm, mm,
So, the air signs, when they do get ill, it tends to be nervous system dysregulation.
yeah. And that I think air signs are particularly, they can be very, very anxious underneath
Yes, yes,
whatever they're doing. There is an anxiety, or
yes,
they may want to cover it up because they're so busy wanting to learn about everything and go out and do and talk and communicate. But
yes.
this underlying anxiety, and I think the other, certainly with Gemini,
Stomach issues.
yeah, but also with Virgo can be very, very anxious ridden and a
Mm.
worrier. It's not Virgo.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's
Yeah, I mean, it
fascinating.
is the hypochondriac sign, isn't it? No offense to anybody listening, but I mean,
Yes,
it
true.
is. It's
Yeah,
that can tip out of balance, and we've all got Virgo in our chart, so it
yes.
depends. And the other side of this is, if we're talking about, we can talk about constitutions, but it's also about, transits and progressions and what's going. I mean, I've just seen a whole slew of people with gut issues. And the reason why is because of the Mars retrograde back into Cancer. And
Oh,
honestly, it was crazy. It was like every call that I was getting, it was stomach issues, gastric stuff, stomach issues, gastric stuff, inflammation.
Is
inflammation in the
and
stomach.
that isn't that interesting? And that's Mars in Cancer.
Yes,
So
yes.
do you feel like as Mars moves through
Mm.
zodiac, I mean, he's obviously now he's in Leo. Do you think that's going to be more heart orientated issues then?
Do you know, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet, interestingly, but I think personally, there's, and this is why it's so multifactorial. I think Mars is more comfortable in fire signs.
Oh yes.
And also, I think a lot of it does depend on the aspects he's making to people's personal planets. I mean, there's different ways of looking at medical astrology. Some people use the natal chart, some people use decumbiture. I don't really go into the decumbiture. I do sometimes if I don't know somebody's birth time, but I look at the natal chart because I look at the potential, I look at the transits, I look at the progressions, I look at, the potentiality of illnesses arising for people when they might start and when they, I always ask people, when did this start? When did this start? And then you can like pull up
Yeah,
a
then you can
chart,
backtrack
those
it, can't
dates,
you?
track
Yeah.
it. When were you in hospital? When,
Yeah.
when did you take the antibiotics? And you build a picture up like that. So a lot, so you have people's basic constitutions, but it's more complex than that because I mean we all live in the UK. I'm in Wales, high rainfall area, so I see people with a lot of phlegmatic conditions, a lot of upper respiratory stuff going on because it's so damp here.
Mm.
But they might be choleric. They might be fiery, but they're getting all these damp conditions. And if they have a tendency to earth, then things can start in a very acute way, and then they bed in and they get deep into the tissues, and then they become, a chronic problem. So there's all different factors, environmental pollutions and
Fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I'd love to talk about mental issues in another video with you because I think that'd be fascinating to look at the elements and how our mental health. But we won't do it this time. But what I wanted to end with is we talking before we started this video about, and you came up this word, and I've heard it before, and it makes me laugh every time. Hopiism.
opium.
Hopium. Do you want to explain? I mean, we are going through huge shifts. We are. There's no question about this. I
Yes,
mean, the world is definitely what we would call interesting at the moment, or humanity's relationship with the world
yes,
and themselves
yes.
is very interesting. Um, Tell me what you mean about hopium.
Okay, so just with a little bit of context about what we were nattering about before this recording is that um, the spiritual community in particular is, with all this dysfunction in the world at the moment, and nobody really knows what's going on. We can make guesses at it, but it's just, and it's this sanguine thing, isn't it? This rapid pace of communication. We're all seeing things all the time now from all over the world and getting news, and a lot of it is conspiratorial, a lot of it is untrue, and being able to separate fact from fiction takes a lot of discernment and and our intuition balance is off anyway, can be off. I won't do readings if I'm feeling that I'm not quite in tune. Um, but within the community at the moment, I think there are a lot of people who are talking about, um, they're using very big concepts that we have no evidence of. And I'm a very left-brained, right-brained person. I can be very intuitive, but I need evidence. And I'm not seeing evidence of this ascension process. It's like, what does ascension mean? And especially when we're talking about that there's a very distinct group of people who are going to ascend and a distinct group of people who are not and who are going to remain behind. And all right, it may have its roots in some kind of biblical ideology, and I understand that that is very much coming to the forefront at the moment. But I think there are a lot of people who are talking about these big concepts who've never experienced anything directly themselves. And I said before that I've got a very good BS detector, and there's a lot of people with very big platforms and very big audiences who are just saying, look, it's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. And I think that is so dangerous because I think the power of the mind is very, very strong in that we do to a certain extent create our own reality. I have like actual examples of that for myself. And it's where you place your energy, where you put your energy, but don't disengage from what's going on in the world at the moment. I think that's so, so dangerous because people are getting hurt in real time. Things are getting quite dangerous in real time in the 3D that we live in. And I think there's this disconnection. I've even seen people telling people, don't take that in. It's not real. It's not really. It's like if a tree falls in the desert kind of analogy. It's not really happening. Well, it is really.
It is. Yeah, that's reality. Is
Jump on a plane and go and experience it if you don't believe it's happening.
absolutely. I'm completely there with you. That I just love the word hopium. I love it because I think that sums it all up. And I think both of us are coming from this space of we are going through major changes. When we know we're going through a massive shift. But in my own experience of personal development, you have to do one step at a time.
Yes.
You have to have those insights, and that goes into your soul when you just go, oh, I get it. And then there's another one and another one. I don't believe it's possible to do a great leap. I just don't. And I know people are talking about the 100 if there's 100 people all signed up, we're doing more work in the world than which counteracts 10 million, whatever it is. And there's big people like Greg Braden talking like this. I'm cautious because I think the only thing we can do is take responsibility for ourselves.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
And
But
focus on kindness.
Yeah, the other side to that is, of course, but this is a whole other conversation. You don't send me off on a tangent because you'll be here till the night. But there is a lot of disinformation that is being deliberately put out. I do believe that, and the net effect is that people don't know what to believe. They're being pulled about left and right, and so somebody stands up and says, I know what I'm talking about. Follow me. And they get this massive following of people who are buying into it. And another phrase, other than hopium, I suppose, is spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
It's that's not what we're here for. We're here to experience and bear witness and actually do. And we can't just sit here meditating it away because it's not going to go away. And, we have to use our power to influence others, but take the right action ourselves as well. We have to find our voice during these times. But, they're very dangerous times. I understand why people are becoming a little bit emu-like.
Well, we don't know. We're swimming in uncharted, very Scorpio waters.
Yes.
Deep waters, and we have
Yes.
no idea what's down below. But all
Yes.
we know is something isn't right, which
Yeah.
it isn't right. It isn't, but it is right, but it isn't right because this great shift has been spoken about for thousands of years. If you look at the Hopi prophecies, etc., etc. But I do feel that the most important thing each one of us can do is learn to take full responsibility for ourselves and be very careful about what we believe to be true.
Mm-hmm.
The truth comes from within. It isn't
Yes.
somebody else telling you what's true.
Yes. And it's, when I say dangerous, I mean, dangerous is such an emotive word, but I think as astrologers, we've got to be so careful
Yeah.
because astrology is ultimately, I mean, yes, it's based on historical cycles, but it is very subjective. And
Yeah.
I must admit that over the last few years, I've been very disappointed by some of the big names that I follow, um, who are obviously giving their personal slant on something rather than really trying to dive into the astrology and work out what the astrology and the aspects are actually trying to say. The patterns are very complex at the moment.
Yes, they are.
And you need to ruminate. I mean, just what we were talking about before, you need to go into those spaces of stopping and thinking rather than latching on to somebody who's got the loudest, most authoritarian voice
Yeah.
as being gospel, because it's just not the case.
Well,
Be
that's very That's very Saturn. Well, Saturn's been traveling through Pisces, and I've been saying for ages, just be very careful of the spiritual teachers. I
Yes,
mean, we all need a spiritual teacher, of course we do,
yes,
but be very, very careful about what you're drawn into, and listen to your body. Because we don't
yes,
listen to our body, your body will tell you what the truth is. You'll get
yes,
a toothbrush,
absolutely.
or you'll start to doubt things, and that's okay. Doubt is really healthy at the moment.
Yes. And being able to change your mind and admit it,
Yeah,
not in the ego so much that even if you've been saying something for years and then you just get this epiphany that actually that doesn't stand
doesn't
true
resonate.
anymore, it hasn't got validity. And that's what's happening, I think, in a way. A lot of people are shedding a lot of stuff, especially with Pluto, going retrograde and all the rest of it. They're, shedding, their ideals and their beliefs and their philosophies, but then in the absence of that, it's like you need to form new ones. We do need to have, we need to take a stand. We need to say, look, actually, this isn't right.
Yeah,
Even if it goes against the
yeah,
majority, the
yeah,
majority voice, the majority wisdom, especially in the
yeah.
spiritual
But I
community.
think it's not about feeding the beast, because the beast is full of anger. Well, the collective is oozing anger and disappointment and disillusionment and all that stuff. And I absolutely believe wholeheartedly that we're here in a physical form to
Mm,
understand what love means, and being separated from the
hmm
source, whatever you want to call it, is
hmm
the journey. That's the
Yes,
journey. It's the
yes,
journey back to love. And I really believe in Marianne Williamson's teachings on that. And I
yes.
think that's the one thing that we can really turn to is this a loving action? If it isn't,
Mm,
just be aware, am I deluding myself
mm,
because I
mm.
want to be made to feel better?
Yes, it's frightening how many cults people are joining at the
Yeah.
moment and how they're going with groupthink, rather the hive mind, rather than being the individual. It's people are so easily manipulated.
Well, I think that's a really interesting place to stop. And Nicola, will definitely meet again to talk. I particularly want to talk about mental health issues.
Yes, very prevalent right
Yeah, I
now.
think that'd be fascinating. And thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It made me stretch my mind as well, which is the most important thing. Being an Aquarian, being
Being an air sign.
an air sign, I love a stretched mind. All
Brilliant.
right. Well, thanks so much for now. And to everyone listening, thanks a lot. See you soon. Bye
All
for
right.
now.